Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies, colleagues and friends, it's been the most amazing 3 days, and I for one are very honoured that I'm being allowed to come and talk to you about technology. It's been a passion for mine for many, many years. As those of you who know me, I tend to play with a lot of computers and mobile phones and get involved with students who are keen on these sorts of things. We are going to touch on higher education in this talk, and I was absolutely thrilled to see the mention of mind mapping just in the film, as well as some of the other techniques. But as you can see from this initial picture, we are all connected now, and it's quite incredible. I don't think I ever dreamt when I started on this journey that we would be able to Skype our friends in Australia, mobile phone and text my friends in Kenya. I never thought this was going to be possible. And in fact, 2 minutes ago, I had a friend in England wishing me good luck on my MSN messaging. So here we go. We have the iPhone, the ordinary Nokia telephone, or whatever phone one wants to use, whirling around the world and giving us messages. We have folks on computers. But we actually need to know how to access these computers. And in many ways, one of the sort of starting points from my career was looking at the pinnacle of that triangle. Access technologies, or assistive technologies, are those technologies that enable users to be able to use both a computer and a mobile phone. And they range from highly technological things like a screen reader, which will read both the menus and all the content on the screen. But for those who have dyslexia, very often it's just the content that is needed. But people tend to mix up screen reading and text-to-speech, so accept both as equal for this talk. But what I'd like to say about this is that we really feel that we shouldn't just box up assistive technologies as being something specialist. I want to break open that box this morning. I want to look at other tools as well, especially those that are free and available online. And I want us to be thinking about productivity, because one of the main issues for students with dyslexia is the time it takes them to work. We know that if we're working on the internet and we're using a screen reader, and we have to read absolutely everything, it can take 6 times longer. We know if we're using magnification, it can take 3 times longer. But we know if our reading speeds are down at 180 words per minute or 95, at university, we're meant to be reading at 350 on average to get through the journals that our lecturers give us. So there are some real issues about speed online. And that comes under the term of productivity. And so someone was talking about the way you can use Microsoft Office Word, and you can change the colors. You can use autocorrect to speed up your spelling. There's an awful lot you can do with just the freely available technologies within the operating systems. The ones that I'm actually also interested in are the ones that are portable on a Pendrive or online. Having said that, Vector, that's a British organization that has been looking at some time at the technologies that our students are using, has done a recent survey. And they've now provided a booklet that's available for all teachers, the 21st Century Teacher. And what they're saying is that 81% of teachers agree that ICT makes learning more effective. But we're a little bit worried about the students, because those they actually had on this survey said that they ranked computers as 4th out of the 16 things they like to do in learning. That's despite the fact that 95% of them spend their time online or on computers, and 75% are using mobile phones. And these are students aged between 8 and 19. One wonders what they're doing at other times. And I think it's rather nice to see that actually their top 3 choices turn out to be learning in groups, doing practical things, and learning with friends. Now, as Professor Laurillard mentioned earlier, it's possible to link up these practical things with the computer. And I think we need to be looking at ways of doing that and collaborating more online with our students. And in fact, this is what a lot of the parents are asking for. And in this survey, 66% of the parents would like schools to use technologies such as text messaging and the internet to communicate more frequently. However, only 8% of parents were kept informed about using these methods, which seems a little sad because we know that in our schools, most students have access to a computer at least 2/3 of the time when they're in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. What I'm concerned about too is that we in the West are not making enough use of the mobile phone. I know when I go to Kenya, so many of the students have mobile phones and are texting, and many of the teachers there are using texting for getting students to collaborate. It's a very exciting thing. They are leapfrogging us in Africa on our mobile phones for those of us in Britain. So what about higher and further education? A colleague has just mentioned some of the issues here about being able to have extra time. Well, here we definitely find the students have access to the internet, but 76% of them appear to be doing it in their bedrooms. Access to certain parts of the internet, and in particular to assistive technologies, is not always possible across all the networks on all the university servers. Sometimes the desktops are locked down, so you can't necessarily personalize your workspace. 2/3 are using social networking sites regularly. That's things like Facebook, Bebo. What I'd like to say about that is, it means that our students are collaborating, even if, as has been shown in another Bector study, that only 37% of the teachers were actually using the computers for collaborating with students. They were mainly using them for working on research projects, gathering information. It wasn't about interaction, it was more about gathering. 84% like to keep up to date with new technology. Well, that's very true of a group of students that I've been working with over the last year and a half on the Lex Dyslexic project at the University of Southampton. They not only shared all they wanted to tell me about, they actually allowed us to gather it onto a database that I'm going to be showing you. Now, I'm being a bit of a wimp here. If you can translate that for me, I'm sorry about that word. I'm not actually going to be able to go on the internet to interact with it in a way that I would really love to do this morning. And the reason is that the connections aren't altogether fast. But having said that, what I'm going to show you is how the students are using Skype, Twitter, and MSN. And Stuart asked me to give acronyms a name. It's Microsoft Messaging, but then it changed to Windows Live Messaging, then it changed to something else. So what I will tell you about technology is where you see the acronyms, very often they stay as acronyms because the actual underlying meaning changes, and obviously it changes for the language as well. Collaborative calendars, mind maps, writing. We're looking at wikis, blogs, a completely new set of words that very often are hard to translate. Google Docs for collaborating on writing, and then back to the social networking. And you'll notice I've given you a picture here of the iPad on the right with the iPhone, and that was launched last week to much excitement. Now, I see the iPad actually as being a very chic augmentative communication device. I long to try it out. I long to have icons on there, symbols on there that can be easily touched with the tactile nature of it. The trouble is the screen is very shiny and we're not sure it's going to work out in the sun. So we're leaving our students with very bulky computers often and rather dull-looking things because actually when you go outside, the reflective nature of the screen has an impact and you can't necessarily see what you need to press in order to speak. But that's my speech therapy side coming out. What I do like about the ordinary keyboard and the ordinary mobile phone is that it tends to be pretty reliable now, which it wasn't 20 years ago. But there are other barriers still too. And some of these are related, as I mentioned before, to the personalization of your desktop, to your ability to change it in the way you want, to put the background color to a different one to the one that's provided. Navigation is also an issue, and we have huge problems here with forums. We're talking about Ning, we're talking about LinkedIn. These are forums used by teachers, they're used by business people. but the students are using Facebook. And if we go into education, we're talking about Blackboard. We're talking about Moodle, which I'll discuss in a second. The problem about these forums is that we forget how important a subject line is. I want you to imagine that you're a tutor who's sending out a message to a group of students about the time of the lesson. It's 12:30, February the 14th, 2010. You want all your students there. You send out the message, you tell them what books to bring, you tell them about the class, you send the message out, you put it on the forum, and then you suddenly remember you've forgotten to tell them which room it's in. Your students are all there, they know the date, they know what to bring, they don't know which room. So you quickly go and send another message out. It's in room 32. It's on the 4th floor. You'll be able to see it, it's got a large sign. You send the message out. What's the subject line on that message? Is it still saying class on February the 14th? If it is, your student may well store that same message in the wrong category. And inside that message, you have that vital information that it's room 32. And you have allowed them to store that message under the time, the date, but you've forgotten to change the content of that subject line, so they don't necessarily see which room they've got to go to. And then they're late, they're flustered, they're worried, they've lost confidence. One of the main problems we have now with online messaging, with online forums, is making sure we use it correctly, making sure we teach our students to keep the threads clear, to keep them short, and then to keep the content well proportioned to what you're trying to say. Too much content, the message isn't going to get across. Changing slightly here, a lot of these open forums are now free, as we know, and a lot of the software is open source. So it's being developed, can anyone translate this, on the hoof? As we go along, other developers are coming in. Some developers are leaving, things are changing. This can make it quite difficult to keep up to date. It's where the commercial products have an advantage, in some ways, but only in some. What I would say is that our experience with our Lex Dys students working with Blackboard and with Moodle, in other words, a commercial product versus an open source or free one, is that the navigation issues were the same. It just rolled down the screen. People didn't realize about little boxes being able to be ticked to shorten what they were seeing. There are real issues here with us helping our students to navigate around these forums. So what about MSN messaging? Well, some of our students really preferred it because it was real time. They didn't have to wait till 2 o'clock in the afternoon for a thread to come down. Or, as one poor nurse who was living in a halls of residence where there was no online communication, ended up in her pajamas rushing downstairs to quickly fill in something because she knew she was being marked on it for an assignment and she'd forgotten to do it earlier. They liked working in Facebook because they knew it. It was somewhere that obviously they'd become used to between school, university, and college. But we are very worried, many of us, about data protection and about security. And so many colleges and universities are very worried about putting things onto these public spaces. Our students are using Skype for testing each other. The advantage here is that you can use voice and video if you have a good connection. But there's the rub. So what we try to do is to persuade them to perhaps start a face-to-face with the webcam and then shut it down so that the chat can continue or the audio can continue. Because that actually, we found that the video has an impact on that connectivity. But speed of typing can be a real problem, and no one has mentioned that here in the last 3 days. But I'm very aware that many of our students don't find typing that easy. And some of them would rather have a tablet where they could either just write. But then others will say that writing is a real issue and they prefer to type. So we really need to make sure that when we choose these technologies, they're individualized. And that's where it's really exciting. There are so many of them now that students can choose the ones that suit their needs. We learn that actually we must be more flexible. Spell checking, if you are an Apple Mac user, and I noticed Professor Laurelard and several others here are using Macs, I can see them all across the front, you have a big advantage. Your spell checker goes across all applications, and it will work with MSN and Skype. If you're on a Windows machine, you will need to go and find a shareware spell checker if you haven't got some specialized assistive technologies. In the UK, many of our university students either have Claro Read or Text Help Read and Write Gold, and I know Ian Sist have been outside all the last 3 days showing you some of the products that they sell. So here we are. On the top right, we have Twitter. That is the 140 characters. You write in a very short sentence, and you don't tell me what you're having for breakfast unless you're Stephen Fry in the UK. Most of the Twitter people that I work with use it to say what is the latest technology. And you can see here there are threads where we're discussing technologies. Some of the students on Twitter use it to say what they feel about their courses, what they feel about the work they're doing, and they share it. It doesn't have to be about something technological in my case. Going on the left, you'll see that here I'm using Skype. This is where I've been discussing with a colleague about the colors we wanted for a toolbar we're making. Now, I don't like the clutter on the left. There's a lot of names there. I would normally remove them, but this is the latest version of Skype. And I would say to you, please, if you're working with students with dyslexia and you want to use Skype, make sure you reduce the amount of clutter on the screen. Close it off in the options. Also, make sure you ensure that the privacy bits on Skype are set to just the contacts you want to see. And I'll be talking about how you can do it with children as well. And down at the bottom here, we have MSN, a much cleaner screen. But look at the concerns I have here. The contrast levels are very poor. Readability of the menus are quite difficult. But you can, what they call, reskin it. You can put your own colors on it. You can choose the way it looks. But it's a much cleaner interface. So many of our students preferred that. Safety for children on these connected networks is quite a worry. And I apologize for the fuzziness of this picture, but I had to do what's called a screen grab. Here you have something called Scipito, which, or I hope I pronounced that correctly, is something that has been added on to Skype. You have to have a Skype account, but if you're concerned about children going on, you can use this version because it has security settings. What I like about it is it works with icons. You can see the pictures of who you're connecting. You don't have to read names. Accessible Twitter on the left is a really useful way of using Twitter with students because it is totally screen reader friendly. You can read everything. There is a major problem though, and I'm going to be describing that later, called the CAPTCHA. C-A-P-T-C-H-A. Not a good thing for a screen reader. But what you'll see on Accessible Twitter is the good layout. There are gaps between the messages. There are colors between the messages. There's a line around the text box. I think that really is helpful. So good design is an issue. Here we are on the LexDys website. That's lexdys.org.uk. And what you see here is a student has been able to give us not only their MSN connection with a picture of how they're sharing their diagrams. We were talking about mind mapping and diagrams. They're able to do that on MSN. There you see some complex equations going on. But we can also embed audio for them. And what you're going to see about that audio, and I'm sad I can't play it, is the fact that we've added some HTML coding there because most of the players that you see online are not keyboard accessible. And if you have students with RSI as well as dyslexia who don't like using a mouse, very often they're unable to reach it. The players we found work in Internet Explorer, but not necessarily the other browsers if you want to just use a keyboard. And we've given you tips throughout, and there are actually on these web pages more about general accessibility. Going on to collaborating when you're writing, one of the students introduced me to the idea of reflection, I should say, on a blog. What she loved about it was the framework it gave her. She could totally make that blog private. It did not go out to the world. She ticked all the privacy boxes, and then every time she wanted to write either her thesis or a short essay, she would put paragraphs in the blog. And she went down, and then she got her friends to comment on them. It was a very neat way of organizing her work, and it was free. LiveJournal is a blog that you can go to. Again, I'm saying weblog, and I'm calling it a blog. It's just like a diary on the internet. What's so good about the personal diary in LiveJournal is that you can actually also change the colors and the fonts and things. In wikis, you can actually click on words, and I'm going to show you one now where you can collaborate, and the famous Wikipedia is an example of it. Issues are going to be spell checking once again. But we're extremely lucky now. We, on the whole, have most of the editors in the blogs have their own spell checkers. That's only happened in the last year or so. If you don't have a spell checker, actually, we've developed a toolbar called the Dyslexia toolbar, which will spell check your blog. And what we've done is we've designed it so that the spelling comes below the writing. It's not a separate dialog box. It appears as you write. And I'll be talking about online spell checkers in a second. Now, at the moment, this is open source. It's written in English, but we have had inquiries from French and Dutch to be able to enable us to put it into different languages. Because it's open source, we are really asking for help with this to allow us to expand the project to cross any country and any language. On this toolbar, we've allowed for text resizing. Now, I just want to stress the importance here. When you are working in your browser, you can zoom and make everything big. You can make pictures big. You can make everything big. This doesn't necessarily help the dyslexic student. They don't need big pictures. They need the writing to reflow. They just may want it a little larger. We've allowed that with the magnifier, the plus. We've also allowed where you see the T for the text to be changed. So some websites, if they're written in plain, and I'm now going to get a little bit techie, hypertext language markup, you can actually change the text into a sans serif, into an Arial format, into Helvetica. You can change it to the font you like. You can also add gaps between the lines, which we know helps with reading. And then when you go further along the toolbar, past the spell checker, you'll see there's a dictionary, a little book, and then you'll see speech. That's text-to-speech. You can highlight the text in any web page that's using HTML, and you can have it read back to you. The British are known for apologizing. I'm going to have to admit, because it's free, and because we didn't want to have a voice that we had to license at vast expense, it's a free Scottish voice, Festival. But we're hoping we can find some more open source free voices so that we can have them in different languages. And finally, you can grab the web content and you can change the colors. So that's the TechDis toolbar, which is on a website, which I'll be giving you the URL at the end. And very quickly, moving on, here's an example of the biggest wiki in the world, Wikipedia. It appears in many languages. I'm sure you've all seen it. The disadvantages is that it's full of content, full of text, although some of the pages have pictures. What we've been trying to explain to our tutors who are using Wikipedia is that actually it's made in something called MediaWiki. You can get it for free. Anybody can make a wiki. If you do make a wiki, make sure you don't have so much down the side. Make sure that you don't have long menus, that they're very clear menus with lots of space. And that has come out of our research with these students. And finally, there you see our blog, which you can go to. And the problem with that is that that's an awful lot of text as well. But WordPress, which is the free blogging service, just like blogger.com, allows you to add pictures and videos. So what about spell checking for everybody else who doesn't have a toolbar like ours? Well, of course, the one that most people know is the Google toolbar, and it comes in many languages, but it doesn't have text-to-speech. But you can add lots of little apps to it, and we want to do that with our toolbar. But if you're running Internet Explorer and you speak Dutch, French, or German, then IE Spell is quite a good spell checker. Firefox has several dictionaries in different languages, and it has the bonus of underlining the spelling. Safari, Opera, Google Chrome, all built in, but I have a concern about the spell checkers when I'm talking in English, or I'm using it with English, and I'll explain why in a second. There's a new collection of spell checkers that we feel have huge promise for those with dyslexia. Those are the context-sensitive error checkers. And in fact, I think if there's someone here from Ginger, they would be horrified that I'm saying spell checker, because actually what it does is it checks the errors in context to the sentences. But there is a downside in that you have to cut and paste if you want to use it freely. There is an Internet Explorer button, and it will work with Word. What happens, though, with both Ginger and Got It, is that it stores the word, the errors that you're making as you type in on the Internet, in the same way that Google toolbar collects all the errors. So the rates of success could be very high. When we're looking at the paid-for assistive technologies, I think it's very important to show that all is not good in the world of free spell checkers. There is a huge variation in the success rate because those spell checkers that have had years of research and development, such as Text Help Read and Write, Claro Read, several others, they have had phonetic errors added, or they've had dyslexic errors added, and they've got a lot of bizarre spellings in them. If you actually put them in, and you'll find some of them come out very amazingly correct. But there is again another issue here, which is usability. So if we're working on the web and you happen to have an assistive technology, very often that technology will have to be as an extra toolbar, or it'll be down in your system tray, and you need to launch it. And we've discovered that our students are not using these assistive technologies when they're working online, unless they're being marked. And this is a real concern for us. We have found of 3 different groups of students. One was at a college where 15 students admitted they didn't really spell check when they were working on their blogs or their wikis. If they were pushed and they were going to be marked for an assignment, they would go and use MS Word. They would cut and paste what they'd written into the blog. 6 steps. If they were asked, had they got assistive technologies? Oh, yes, some of them said they had. So we then moved on to our Lex Dys students, who all had assistive technologies. And we asked them the same question. Well, I don't always use my spell checker. I can't be bothered. It's too much of a hassle. Apologies for the translation there. But what came out of it more was, actually, I asked my friends to check my work. Why? Because I'm not sure the spell checker will catch my errors. How right she is if we're only catching 20%, or missing, I should say, 20% of the errors. We have a concern here. But some of the best paid-for spell checkers are now reaching 80% accuracy. It is very exciting. 1973, 1983, Donna Montgomery's work, several other people's work showed we were around the 70s. We got up to 74% with a little bit of research that Abby James, me and Sist and I were doing. We're very excited to see it's improving. But don't trust your spell checker all the time. And when it comes to free ones, I'm afraid you're on the 50% line, even with Google. Having said that, Ginger, by the way, is up there at the top for the online spell checkers. What are the other issues that we have? Very quickly, because I'm aware that we're running out of time. One of the absolutely, and I almost can't explain my anger sometimes when I come across these, is this idea that we can log in, we can actually go and join all these free networks, but we can only do it if we can read some letters in a peculiar order that have lines and squiggles through them for security reasons. I mentioned the capture before, I'm going to mention it now. The audio capture, I don't know if anyone here has tried it. It means that you're meant to be able to hear the sounds and then be able to log in hearing letters or numbers rather than seeing them. Now, I know there's a colleague here who has a screen reader, JAWS, and even JAWS which is one of the supreme screen readers, most complex, cannot hack the capture. I have a feeling we need to invent a new way of working with this security issue. And here, by the way, we have a Facebook equivalent in Chinese. It has the same problem of the capture. For the dyslexic person, they are very difficult to read. And I have watched students do 3, 4 attempts. And if we're talking about auditory processing difficulties, the auditory version is no help either. We know it's possible from research to use pictorial versions of logging in, but then you have to memorize up to 6 different pictures or positions on a picture. So we need to crack this security one, because invariably our dyslexic students are often seeking help, because the capture, of course, cannot be written on a post-it note and stuck in a bag and hidden away. The capture appears whenever you want to join something. So here you see me talking now, very quickly for the last couple of minutes, about more accessible online collaboration. And basically, what I'm saying is go mobile. Facebook has less clutter. It's much easier to use. Go and check out whether what you want to use with your students is accessible. web2access.org.uk has 130 online free applications, services that are there for collaborating with students. We've already evaluated them for you. We'll tell you whether you can change the colors. We'll tell you if you can change the fonts. We'll tell you whether they've got a capture. Lastly, I'd like to introduce you to Synote. We've been talking for 3 days. We have not provided you with handouts necessarily or our PowerPoints. But what we can do now for free is not only put them online, we can provide you with the audio in the top left-hand corner, and we can provide you with the highlighting of the transcript. And you can even annotate it. So I know that yesterday someone was talking about deaf dyslexic students. Here is a way of transcribing, providing annotation and timed annotation. So you can click on any of where it says, email us your comments. You can click on that and it will jump to where that's said in the audio. You can also put a video on. The service is totally free from synote.org. What you can do is go and get any video. You can get a YouTube video because that stays on the server, and you can then add the transcript and you can annotate it. Finally, there's a pen drive on our website that you can go and get at access.ecs.sotton.ac.uk. On it, you will see a whole collection of free programs for use with students. We've made the menu totally accessible. You can enlarge it, you can change the colors, you can change the fonts. It makes it a lot easier than having those small folders. The free programs that I'm mentioning here are in English, but you can get free mind mapping programs. They're all on that website. If you link to the EduApps website, eduapps.org, you will find an array of learning and teaching tools that you can put on that pen drive. They are all of them available from portable apps as well as EduApps. And if you are in Canada, you'll know that the AdaptTech Dawson College website has some wonderful free applications in both French and in English. And in the UK, we have oatsoft.org for open source software, if you want to get involved in that. So finally, 24/7 access we have. Our students really value it. They expect to be able to use their personal technologies and services in institutional contexts. They don't like having desktops locked down. They don't like having to move between different library places to try and find their assistive technologies. Although many of them have laptops, they can't carry them around all day. And students, therefore, are creating their own learning spaces. And somehow we need to get there and be with them because they are enormously creative people. Thank you very much, and I wish you luck in your journey home.